First of all, this right here is exactly what I'm going to talk about. This right here is social capital in the room. This is exactly what students need in order to be successful in college. Obviously, we'll give you a whole presentation right now for a half hour about that. But this is exactly what I'm going to be talking about. First, I'll start off and talk about my title. And first of all, don't look at this hieroglyphics. I think they're just supposed to understand because they're not. I'm just going to turn around and look at it, and then I'll be able to move on. Start with my title. Diversifying capital. Typically, when we think about capital, we're thinking about money. But this type of capital that I'm going to discuss today is not money. It's from a concept that Pierre Bourdieu came up with called cultural capital. Cultural capital is the knowledge of the dominant culture that allows a person to be able to navigate greater society. And in this presentation, I will relate that to the way in which that affects the success of first generation immigrant and first generation students in general. Moving on from that, the way Bourdieu looked at it was based on social class. And of course, social class divisions affect student success in college. It affects access, and also will affect your ability to navigate. But I'm not looking at it that way. I'm looking at it in terms of the way in which it allows you to navigate a social setting. So I'll give you an example in terms of cultural capital. For many of you students in the room, when you get to college, it's the first time that you hear certain vocabulary terms that you've never heard. People reference movies or books that you've never heard of. And what happens is you begin to feel isolated in the classroom. And the question I'm pondering is, how do we get students to be able to develop their capital? And this presentation is what I called, when I was speaking about this earlier, an indictment on higher education. And it's to discuss the things that educators can do in order to help first generation and immigrant students navigate their setting. You want to come in?
Thank you.
Yeah. So this presentation will be divided into two sections. The first one will be to discuss first generation students in general. And then the second part will be to discuss immigrant students, and then to bring that all together. It's certainly not to suggest that immigrant students don't face their own particular issues. I'm not suggesting that. But what I'm suggesting is that I found some similarities in the issues that first generation students in general face and the issues that immigrant students face in college. So, starting off with immigrant students. The first thing I found in my research is that this student population is not tracked very much. I thought that I was going to go online and go into the databases and get a ton of research about this, and that this would be an easy project to put together. But it wasn't, and in fact, it ended up making me change my question a bit. And originally, when I defined success, I defined it as being able to overcome barriers to success to access to college, and then being able to graduate. That was my original plan. But when I looked at the research, I found that this student population is often not tracked all the way through. So after their first year, there was a lot of research out there on what they were doing following their first year experience to maintain the success they maybe had as a first year student. And a lot of times, they were out of college by the end of their first year. So that was kind of something I found in my research. Of capital are from home. And as I mentioned earlier, cultural capital is what have I learned from the household, and when I bring it to greater society and to school, that will allow me to feel comfortable in a social setting. And I'll give you an example of how this comes from home. First generation students don't have parents who have already gone to college and gone through this process. So they don't have the knowledge of the expectations that they'll face when they get to college. I have a quote in my paper that said first generation students are educational pioneers. That's exactly what they are for their family. They're the first to navigate this setting, and then they are sometimes expected to go back and translate what the setting is like for maybe their siblings or other people. But for them, that's not the case. And what happens when first generation students get to college, this is even after they overcome these barriers of cultural capital or social capital, any of that in high school, what happens is they find a difficulty in adjusting to college. And what I've found is that there are 4 ways that students will be able to adjust to higher education. But the issue is that, these 4 things that students need in order to adjust are the things that they also lack. So the solution to the problem is the problem itself, if that's clear. You feel that the way you speak is now invalid. If the way you speak is in reference to where you come from, now your life experience is invalid. And that's a difficult feeling. Now, I don't want it to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that students of color who are first generation students, let's just work with them. I'm saying that first generation students feel that way, and that it's a little bit more hard-hitting to reference students of color in their feeling. But first generation students and immigrant students who there are cultural assumptions made about, who professors assume that because you don't speak English that well, you must not be able to do this work. And because I'm a global studies major, in a global community, this is going to be a classroom that's going to look very, very, very different over the next few years. And institutions of higher education in the U.S. must rid itself of this pull yourself up by the bootstraps bias. It must. And also, to conclude, I only got about 2 minutes now, right? Yeah. I want to kind of end this discussion with a little bit about privilege. In order to see parity in institutions of higher education, right? To see more professors who these students believe they look like or can resonate with, right? That would take people to give up their privilege. Now, there's some people in the room that are like, what privilege are you talking about? I'm talking about white privilege. The privilege of, by way of being born white, not only do I believe that I can be somebody, because most of the people who stand in front of me and are somebody look like me, but I'm also expected to be somebody. And so that creates a cycle, and it maintains existing power structures. But as I read in my paper, I thought, I want to be a little bit careful about that. Because that's going to mean I have to give up my male privilege. So then I said, I don't know. Because I'm beginning to enjoy a little bit of this privilege and being in college and having access to certain networks that other people don't have access to. So now I'll be a pessimist. I would have to be suggesting that existing power structures are going to be able to completely be overthrown, and we're going to be able to achieve that parity that I believe we can. Until we are able to have a candid, real discussion about who has privileges and who does not have them, then that will not occur. And to end on a negative note, certainly, I don't believe that we're ready for that discussion. So, my time here is done. So,